Thank you for coming out tonight. This should be a pretty interesting program. Just want to say thank you. You've all been invited because you're subscribers, and we appreciate your support and your support for community journalism. So I'll hand it off to Ryan.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I kind of assumed with the $5 you guys would get a 2-drink minimum, so if you want to meet me somewhere after this, maybe we can do that. As Mark said, my name is Ryan Thorburn. I cover Oregon football, mostly for the Register Guard and other things throughout the year. I actually started almost exactly 4 years ago, and my dad and my daughter Madeline in the back there happened to be here tonight, and I remember when they dropped me off 4 years ago, and it was a brave new world after 13 years in Colorado, but it's been fun, and we kind of feel like Oregon is home now. It's an adjustment, but it's really exciting because Eugene supports the Register Guard so well, and there's such a passion for the Oregon Ducks, and you always want to cover something that people are interested in, and obviously you guys are as interested as anyone to come to this, so hopefully we can answer any questions you have and discuss the Ducks and what's upcoming. I think obviously the main storyline, and let you in on a little secret, our special section cover boy this year will be Willie Taggart. It's a new era of Oregon football. For the first time in 40 years, they've gone outside the family, so to speak, to hire a new coach. He's hired a staff that has some really impressive resumes. Jim Leavitt, the defensive coordinator, did a masterful job at Colorado. I covered the Dan Hawkins years and John Embry's brief foray into Pac-12 football. That did not go well at Colorado. They were really awful, and Jim turned them around in 2 years. I think it's going to take him a couple years to do that here. Obviously, they can't be worse on defense than they were last year. I think they'll be, if they're a middle of the pack defense in the Pac-12, I think that's a good step forward and enough to win some games. So I think the new coaching staff is the storyline. What can they do with this mix of players that, some of them have played national championship games. Some of them have failed on the big stage at the Alamo Bowl and obviously last year. And then obviously mixing in some freshmen into the starting lineup. It's going to be really a fun season, I think. Their schedule is great with Nebraska coming here. There's going to be a lot of red in the stands for that game. I've covered Colorado-Nebraska games where it's like a high school game. It's half and half. They will find their way in somehow, trust me, in mass, even at a place like Autzen. One storyline that is very positive for Oregon is they have their starting quarterback back, and the Pac-12 is loaded with quarterbacks, but you can just tell that Justin Herbert is something special. That doesn't mean he's going to be all Pac-12 ahead of Darnold and Rosen and Falk yet, but you can see it coming for sure. Just the practices that we actually get to watch, the portions of it, which is a new thing, you can tell he has an NFL future. He has a very smart head on his shoulders, and the crazy thing is he's from Eugene, so it's kind of that built-in love affair that a lot of people already have with him. So that's a big storyline, even though there's so many new faces. When you have your quarterback back, you have a chance. And beyond that, his offensive line is back. Royce Freeman is back. And they're looking for wide receivers right now with the departure of Darren Carrington. So I would expect a lot of running the ball. Vintage Oregon leading the Pac-12 in rushing, perhaps. And then crossing their fingers on defense. So before I keep rambling on too much, I mean, those are the main storylines. In terms of position battles, they're looking for receivers, they're looking for defensive linemen. They really love Troy Dye in the middle of the defense. Their secondary is a nice mix of freshmen and older players who have really improved. So Mark wanted me to just touch on some of the main points that you guys probably already know, but I think I'll throw it over to Mims now and see what's on his bucket list here to talk about.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to me is, and Royce Freeman I talked to a little bit today, and Willie Taggart had a good line today that said, he came in and it was an amazing year and he went to the national title game, and then after last year people kind of forgot about him. He said, I really hope that he finishes the way that he started. It'd be nice for Royce to kind of do that, and it's interesting for Royce because that's a guy who could have left the NFL. I mean, he may have been I think for a long time people thought he might have been a first-round pick. He probably would have been more of a third or fourth-round pick this year, but could have been out there. But instead came back with a new staff and a new running backs coach after having Gary Campbell for so long. But I don't think it's surprising. They talked to everybody in the weight room in the offseason, got bigger and bigger, and then you see Royce Freeman, and you're like, didn't think he'd get a whole lot bigger, but he has. And I was asking Willie Taggart today, I said, no, your running back last year, Marlon Mack, who was drafted by the Colts, I said was kind of a speed guy. You had this guy who was kind of a home run hitter. It was more of a give him the ball and hope that fifth or sixth time he goes for 40 yards. I said, what's it like to have a guy like Royce? And he said, don't limit Royce on that. Royce can kind of give you that too. If Royce gets out in the open, he can be a burner for you too. So I think Willie likes the fact that he's kind of got what he had before, but also has a guy who can bring some power to you as well. So I think they really like that. They have, Kenai Benoit, Tony Brooks-James, they've moved Taj Griffin to the outside. I guess my theory going into this season has just been when you look at an experienced offensive line, a quarterback who can't get hurt. I mean, if he gets hurt, everything we're talking about tonight kind of goes out the window. Well, everything we're discussing tonight is with the healthy Justin Herbert, because if he goes out, you're looking at Braxton Burmeister and Taylor Alley and Dimitri Birch and a walk-on there. So I think if you have an experienced offensive line, a quarterback you can't get hurt, 3 good running backs, and not of experience on the outside, I think you're looking at a team that's going to have to look to run the football this year, and I think they're going to do it in different ways. And some of it might be, you can move Brooks, James, and some of those guys outside and throw it to them a little bit, but I think for the most part, you're going to see this team probably run the ball as much as we've seen in the past, if not more. You mentioned they'd led the conference in rushing for 10 years in a row, but I think this year there might even be more of an emphasis on it, because that's what, Willie's offense in the past, he was a running quarterback. There's been a lot of running with that in his past with that offense, and I think that we're going to see more of that this year than there was before.
I'll throw some questions at Ken Woody. What are you writing down, first of all?
What did you say?
What are you writing down?
Just stuff.
Okay.
Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and...
No, the storylines for me is, did anyone have to pay cash for a Husky ticket last year? Raise your hand if you have. You did. Okay, well, I heard they were like $120. And you can imagine how you felt after that game. I want my money back. That team didn't try, they didn't care. I can assure you, with everything that I've seen and I've heard, is that will not be a problem this year. It is a motivated team, and they are being led by somebody who really knows how to connect with the kids. Kids really like him. They will put out for him. They will talk about that. That's really a very positive sign. I think I'm not confident in the amount of talent they have on defense, but they're going to be a lot better coached and more effective. So I think the problem I had last year is you went away from games going, gee, it didn't look like they were trying or all together, and as it turned out, that was what the situation was. That's not going to be the way it is this year, and I think that for those of you who are devoted Duck fans, you'll be proud of their effort through the season. I think the coaches, I've seen 2 practices, and I must say I'm really happy that there are no body cavity searches before you go in like there used to be. It was very, I played at Oregon. I was a donor at one point, and I couldn't go see practice past years. So it's really refreshing to now be welcome back at the University of Oregon. And so I really like what I'm seeing. And people say, well, what do you think? I think that they are going to be 6-6. A lot of people look at me and they look very disappointed, and I say, 6-6 with this league is pretty good. And you all need to understand that when Chip was running over people in the time that he was here, the Pac-12 was a down conference. UCLA wasn't very good. Arizona State were not very good. The Huskies and Cougars were down. It's a lot tougher right now. So they're going to be competitive, and I don't think there'll be a situation where it's the fourth quarter and they're not going to have a chance to be competitive and maybe even win the game. So it's a case of need to be stronger, but they're headed in the right direction.
I'm going to disagree with you already, Ken.
Okay, let's step outside.
I just think this year, I think last year the conference was really good. I think this year it's down a bit. I look at USC and Washington as legitimate top 10 teams, and I saw Stanford and Utah in the top 25 and was actually a little bit surprised. I'm not sure that Stanford, I know, has got a lot of starters back, but the quarterback, Kellen Chris, hasn't shown much. Utah, I don't know what there is there. And UCLA may be better, they may be better than they had been, and Washington State might be what they were last year. I just look at Oregon, and Oregon doesn't play USC this year, which is a break for them, and doesn't have Colorado. I think the schedule, I looked at it, and it's like you look at it and you're like, well, you're not going to win at Washington, but other than that, it almost feels to me, and you're going to beat Southern Utah and you're going to lose at Washington. It almost feels to me like, other than that, there's like 10 toss-up games in there, because I have no idea what to expect from, like I say, Stanford, Arizona State, UCLA, a team that who knows what to expect there. Oregon State's a team that beat Oregon last year and thinks they're getting better too, and now it comes here. So I think that's the fascinating thing about this season to me, is that you look at it, I think they're going to win the first game, and I think they're going to lose the game in Seattle. And to me, there's kind of like 10 other games that you go into, and you think this thing could be, it's like, in past years when they lost like to Utah at home a couple years ago, you're like, that's stunning that it worked out that way. Last year beating Utah was kind of stunning, but I just think there are 10 games that no matter what happens, I won't be surprised if they win, lose, get blown out, win a close one. I think that's the interesting thing to me, is that there's 10 really intriguing games on the schedule.
Steve, we're not going to be here long enough for me to straighten you out tonight. Very typical of a lot of sports writers, he's enamored by offense. Here's what Stanford has. Stanford has hard-nosed, great defense. They can run the ball. Their quarterback is iffy, but they got everything else. And Utah has a great defense. The Cougars have 10 seniors coming back on defense. I was just talking to my former high school coach, who worked with two kids who are starting for Washington State at inside linebacker, and they're pretty formidable. So, I don't want to get too caustic with you, but if you have a defense in the Pac-12, you are a contender. That's it. And so if you don't, or you're not sure, then that's the iffy part. I think that I really like how Levitt is coaching those guys. And they're gonna be there. But right now, I didn't stop off for any wine before I got here, so maybe that's a problem.
The Ducks had a terrible year last year, as we all know, but Austin Meek, to my left, did not. He won the APSE award for best column in our circulation category. And I assume all of you guys read Austin. He's really good. Austin, from a columnist perspective, what are some possible column ideas you have circling in your head, or impressions you have from this Oregon team so far?
Well, I think the big question for me is, where do we set the bar for Willie Taggart in year one? What's going to be a successful season for Willie? When he got hired, I wrote in a column that if he stays 5 years and averages 8 wins a year, it would be a pretty good hire. And I heard from several fans who said, hey, that's not the standard here. We're used to winning 10 games a year, competing for the Pac-12 championship, competing for the national championship. We don't want to go backwards and think about just trying to win 8 games a year. And I totally get that point, and those people are right. That that's not the standard here. But as Ken brought up, it's a different era now, and I'm really curious to see, was last season an aberration? Is Oregon going to go back to being the program that it was the last 10 years? Or was last season a sign that things have changed, that the league has gotten better, that Oregon's not on the cutting edge of things anymore the way it was when Chip Kelly was here? My personal feeling is that if Willie Taggart wins 6 or 7 games this year, that'll be a good season. It may be hard for people to get their minds around that after the success that has happened at Oregon, but that's where I would set the bar. But the good thing is, the fans get to make that choice. The fans get to decide where the bar is set. So I'd be curious to hear from you all, either during the Q&A or afterwards, what your expectations are for Willie Taggart, what you think the team ought to be this year, what you think the team ought to be moving forward, because there has been a really high standard for success set at Oregon. It's going to be hard for Willie Taggart to replicate that, but he's come in and embraced it. To his credit, he said he wants to win a national championship. He wasn't going to leave South Florida unless he could come to a place where he thought he could win a national championship, so he's not running away from that at all.
One area where they're already nationally relevant is on the recruiting trail. How many stars were you, Ken, coming out?
My star is still in the mail.
Okay. Well, stars obviously don't mean a whole lot once they get here and start practicing, but you know, they have 11 four-star recruits in the 2018 class. They're ranked #1 by Scout. If they can hold on to those guys, if they go 7-5 and bring in, say, the #3 recruiting class in the country, that's a pretty good first year.
Well, the one thing that you need to realize is they've got those guys committed, and now they got to keep them committed. But they've done everything. I mean, #1 in the country. It'll be that time period between now and when they sign. But then it's 2 years. 2 years. I've got this green thing here that Chip Kelly used to talk about, water the bamboo. And if you're familiar, that was the mantra of the team that went on to play Auburn in the national championship. And what he told his players is, you guys have to put in a hard day's work every day, every day, every day. And perhaps you're not even going to see any progress. But that's how bamboo goes. And if you're not aware of how bamboo works, you water it every day for 2 years and nothing happens. And then boom, it comes up and it goes like 6 feet a month or something like that. So that's the process. And as you said, Austin, I think I'm not worried about what the season record is. I'd be worried about that first game, and then the second game, and then the third game. That's what we got to look for.
But we don't have to do that, though. Willie Taggart has to do that.
Ken, do you have any other gardening tips for us?
The best thing you talk about, I think the best thing for Willie Taggart might be to win 7 games this year. You win 10, all of a sudden everybody says, well, we're back and this and that expectation. Sometimes the best thing for a coach to do is to go from 4 to 7 to 9 to 10 rather than, Ty Willingham went into Notre Dame and I think won 10 the first year and then suddenly went 8 and 6. Everybody said, well, now it's on the downslide. The last Oregon football coach was in the national title game, and 2 years later it dropped and dropped. So sometimes, I'm not sure Willie would like to win 10 this year, but when you look back on it, sometimes the best thing for a new coach is to come in there and gradually get it going. Make sure you get it going a little bit, but you go too high, then suddenly you bring everything back.
Yeah, I think it's all going to be about signs of progress this year, especially with the recruiting class that Willie Taggart has put together. I think people will show some patience if it seems like the team is moving forward, but you can't go backwards. A program like Oregon never in its wildest dreams would think about finishing 4-8. That just completely blindsided everybody last year, and that's a place Oregon never wants to be again. So, Willie Taggart is in a pretty good situation because he inherited a team that was not very far removed from being really good, but was coming off a season that was really bad. So the starting point for Willie Taggart, you just got to be a little bit better than 4-8.
And Ken, I know what you're talking about in terms of the freshmen, and it takes a couple years, but Justin Herbert played last year. 2 of their 3 starting defensive linemen are going to be true freshmen. A handful of wide receivers are going to be out there. Today's day and age, that's maybe why they're getting some of these guys to come here, is they're going to play next year, this #1 class is.
Well, you're right, and mostly those are at skill positions. And if Herbert gets hurt, what do you got? You got Burmaster, a freshman, who was like Herbert the year before, a freshman. So, I hope he doesn't get hurt. But the fact, nobody should be going around in a trance worried about that. I will say this: Willie Taggart could win 8 games, but the most important game he has on the schedule is Oregon State. Because no matter how many you win or lose, you lose to those guys the second year in a row, and a lot of people in this room are going to be upset.
Well, especially this year's at Autzen. You're looking at last year was sort of the coup de grace was the end of that thing there and blowing the lead there. But That was down the road. They come to Austin and lose. Yeah, I mean, even if you, like you say, if they're 8-3 going into the Civil War and everybody thinks it was a good year, but they lose that and finish 8-4, suddenly that turns to a bad year pretty quick because of the fact you lost at home to the rival.
Well, that's right. The one thing I really like about Willie Taggart is toughness. He talks about being tough. They've got physical practices where they're saying, hey, we're going to be tough guys. Now, coming out of the Oregon State game last year in October, someone asked me, I said, I think Oregon State's going to win just because they're a tougher group of guys. And that's exactly the way it was in the fourth quarter as Oregon State's offense dominated and Oregon State's defense dominated. It was toughness, physical, mental toughness. So that game will be a big game for him to show, hey, not only are we getting lots of recruits and stuff like that, but we're getting tough guys, because you better be tough.
Ken, I love sitting by you in the press box, not just because you're a New York Times bestselling author, but also because you look at the offensive line or the defensive line and where the guards are going, and you point that sort of stuff out. Based on these two practices that you've witnessed, do you see a difference, especially on the defensive line, than last year, and also the way the offensive line is technique-wise doing things?
Defensively, the last 3 years I went up, I used to coach at Washington State, and I went up and watched them play on a Ducks bye game, and I was so impressed with their defensive line. They played like their pants were on fire. I mean, just awesome. They got that coach here now, and that's the way they look to me too. So, I still think there's a guy in there who ought to be playing offensive line, because I don't think he's, fast enough. But they need more speed on the defensive line. But they're going at it the right way. Now, offensively, and this is kind of weird. In the spring game, I was up there, and on the very first play, watching, there was something different. And the offensive linemen were lower in their stances. And I asked Doug Brenner on Media Day, was I seeing things? He says, no. They're bringing their pad level lower, like Stanford, and they're coming off the ball, and they're going to be doing more drive blocking. I think Steve Greatwood is one of the greatest line coaches ever. But they had a different kind of system here. A lot of it was area blocking, which is kind of a lateral, secure, somebody on the edge and everyone else kind of works together. It's a sophisticated, and the Ducks will do that this year too. But the Ducks, you're going to see them do double teams where two guys will come down and block maybe, let's say, the end man on the line of scrimmage. Somebody's going to pull, could be a guard, could be a tight end in motion. Might even be another back, and they're going to kick the end man out, and then somebody's going to lead up on a linebacker inside in front of the running back. And if that sounds familiar, that's exactly what Stanford, their big play. Ducks have struggled over the years to stop it. The years they've beaten Stanford, they have stopped it. But Oregon's going to be running a little more power football. And it's, I asked Brenner, I said, well, what do you think? And he says, well, we miss Wood, but we love this coach, and we love the chance that we're getting to come off the ball and do a little more straight-ahead drive blocking.
Austin, you and I actually had a chance to talk to Rob Mullins the other day, and he's as surprised as anyone that, he said if you would have told me last summer we were going to go 4-8 and all these changes were going to be happening, he was not seeing that at all, obviously. But he did it. Mark Helfrich had a bad season, and he determined that the program's trajectory needed a change. And that's a really tough decision, considering the guy had been in the national championship and had a Heisman Trophy winner and on and on. Were you surprised at all that, he mentioned Greatwood, that none of these long-time assistants were retained? Or is it, Willie Taggart has obviously hired some big names, Mario Cristobal, Jim Levitt, Big Joe Salavea. Is that the way to do it? Just do it your own way and don't worry about what was happening before?
Yeah, I can't say I was totally surprised that it was a complete changeover. I thought maybe there was a chance that Willie Taggart would want to keep maybe one assistant from the old regime just to have some familiarity there. But this is how it works. It's what you sign up for when you make a coaching change, and that's what Rob Mullins was saying is you realize that even though the head football coach is one out of hundreds of employees at the athletic department, that one move has a tremendous ripple effect, and the changeover in the whole athletic department is very noticeable. It feels like turning a page for everybody when you've got a new football staff there. And I think the reality is when you hire a new football coach, you have to give the coach the leeway to build his own program. I don't think it would have worked to hire Willie Taggart and say, Willie, you're our guy, but if you could keep this and this and this and do it this way that Chip did it, I don't think that was going to work. I think they had to give Willie Taggart the leeway to build his own program here, and that's what they've done. That's what Willie's done. I think it was the right thing, but it's still a hard thing because, as you all know, there was so much institutional history with the Oregon football program. So many coaches who had been there for so long. The continuity of that staff was unlike anywhere else in college football. So that was such a hard thing to do, especially after really one down season. But it just speaks to the competitiveness of college football and how quickly things change.
I was curious if they did fire Mark. That's kind of officially the end of Chip Kelly's tenure here. Mark was his offensive coordinator. So the whole win the day thing, does that disappear? Well, the slogan is now do something. But they're going to run kind of the same offense. They call it the Gulf Coast, but it's a spread offense. Justin Herbert, as Steve mentioned, has to stay healthy. Last year, South Florida's quarterback led their team in rushing and was a top 10 rusher nationally. Do you see Herbert running the ball a lot, or is it going to be Royce right, left, and up the middle?
Well, there's a couple other guys who will run around the ends too, but I coached the option game at Washington State, and we had some real good quarterbacks there, and we never wanted to have the quarterback run it a lot, but we did observe that they took a lot less punishment running the football downfield than standing in the pocket getting blindsided from the backside. So I think you want to keep them healthy. The Ducks have got really good running backs who have a lot of different things that they can do. They can hit you as pass receivers. They can get outside very quickly. It reminds me when LaMichael James and Kenyon Barner were in their underclass days, and I was watching an old Oregon State game. They beat them up there the year they went to play Auburn, and the speed of those two guys was just phenomenal. And I think they're gonna show their speed on offense a lot more.
Steve, as a media person that's been around here for a long time, and because Austin and I weren't around for Chip Kelly, what's your take on Willie Taggart's just kind of loosening the reins in terms of media access and Ken Woody access and trying to engage the fans a little bit? I mean, he's joked with you about fake news, and you got him to talk about his dad when it was apparent that he probably didn't want to do that today. So what's kind of your first read on Willie as a kind of an ambassador in the community?
Yeah, I really think that's the way it is at most places. I mean, you close things down a little bit, and we're seeing 20 minutes of practice. It's not like things are completely opened up, but I think Chip Kelly could shut things down and could kind of move the boosters out and not have to deal with it because he won. And I think looking back, Mark Helfrich probably should have been a little bit more open to things. It was like he tried to do a little bit too much of kind of the way Chip had it going. And when you go to 4-8 and the fans feel a little bit blocked out, and it just kind of changes things. And I think Willie kind of came in with an attitude like, hey, this is kind of the way I did it in South Florida. And I think people probably Oregon say, well, this is the way we've done it here. And I think if you're really Taggart, you want to do it the way you've done it. You don't want to come into a place and say, well, how did they do it here before? All right, well, let's do it that way. Because, I think Willie's come in and said, this is what I did before, and this is the way it's going to be. And like I said, there's no secrets that are being out there now. It's not like, they're inviting anybody in there to watch the whole thing, or they're, it's just, it's a little bit more, hey, let's, we're not going to show you these 20 minutes of what's going on, and you can see it. And I think it's just a little bit more, they're had a few more open practices already. I assume they'll probably continue more of those. Like Willie's done more, we saw him when he was first hired. I mean, he was going out to basketball games and sitting in the pit crew. He was, again, things that the old coaches didn't do, but when you won, you didn't have to do it. But then when you lost, you realized that, well, maybe I should have gone out and been a little bit more forthcoming. So I think Willie's just kind of come in and brought his style. I would guess if you talked to people at South Florida and told him the things that he's done in the first 8 months, they'd tell you those are the things he did in every month that he was at South Florida. It's just kind of his personality, and I do think that's good for him, that he's brought in his personality and said, hey, this is the way we're going to do things, and not been kind of locked in that, hey, this is the way that it's been done here for the last 8 years.
Austin, obviously, Willie won the press conference on December 7th. I'm sure a lot of you guys saw that, but then they had some problems. The strength coach had 3 guys go to the hospital, was suspended. Another coach was terminated after a DUI. Where is Willie as far as, I know nationally those are things people remember, but it kind of feels like that's all behind them, especially with the addition of the coaches they replaced those guys with?
Well, anybody who's been married a long time realizes that the honeymoon does not determine what the marriage is like. Willie Taggart had a pretty rough honeymoon with having to fire an assistant coach right away and having to suspend his strength coach. Those are not things you want to deal with as a head coach in your first couple months on the job. So he was really put to the test right away. But I agree with you. I feel like those things feel like a long time ago now. And I think what he's done since then has been pretty strong in terms of setting the agenda or the message for the program. I think right now the message from Willie Taggart around the program is just one of positive momentum. He needed that. That's typical when you've got a new coach. Usually a new coach going into his first game, people are pretty excited about it. But he did have to deal with some adversity early on. Maybe we'll think back on those things. If it doesn't work out with Willie Taggart 2 or 3 years down the road, we'll think back on those things and see, we saw some signs early on of some red flags with this guy. But on the other hand, if he succeeds here, if they win a bunch of games, I don't think people are going to remember the honeymoon a few years down the road.